two girls are out and about on a sunny day. It's Saturday, so they don't have to go to school and can make the most of their day off. The children have a very clear goal. They are going to the nearby supermarket to stock up on sweets for the day. But only one of the two girls will return from this trip, and she will witness the kidnapping of her best friend. It is November 19, 1988. Thanksgiving is just around the corner in the US. The children have a few days off school, and the weather in Hayward, California is fantastic. 9-year-old Michaela Garecht is spending the day, as she often does, with her friend Katrina, who is the same age. The two girls are best friends, and on days off like this, they often spend hours riding their scooters around town. On this Saturday morning, the two are heading to Rainbow Market to stock up on candy and soda. They leave their scooters in front of the supermarket. When they come back out, they are in such a good mood that they forget about their scooters. It is only after a few meters that they notice that their scooters are still standing in front of the entrance. So they turn around. But Michaela's scooter is no longer next to Katrina's. It is suddenly several meters away in front of a car. The two friends don't think much of it. Michaela walks over to grab her scooter. But before she can get on, a man suddenly jumps out and grabs the girl. Katrina has to watch everything from a few meters away. Michaela screams and kicks, but the man looks quite strong and big. Katrina runs back into the Rainbow Market and alerts the staff. A cashier immediately calls the police. But before anyone can do anything, the man has put Michaela in a car and drives away from the parking lot. All that remains is Michaela's scooter. When the police arrive at Rainbow Market, the situation is unclear. 9-year-old Katrina is naturally in a state of shock and needs immediate care. At the same time, investigators are racing against time to find Michaela as quickly as possible. Katrina is an important witness, but the child is so distraught that it is almost impossible to question her immediately. However, there is a second witness. A supermarket employee also claims to have witnessed the abduction of Michaela Garecht. She provides the police with a detailed description of the man and his vehicle. In addition, a fingerprint is found on the handlebars of Michaela's scooter. Since the perpetrator took the scooter and placed it in front of his car as a decoy, it stands to reason that the fingerprint actually belongs to the kidnapper. So, for now, things are looking hopeful. The situation is more than serious, but with this information, the chances of finding Michaela quickly are good. In no time at all, tens of thousands of search posters and flyers are produced and distributed throughout Hayward. Everything is going well, and action is being taken quickly. But there is a problem. When Katrina is questioned 2 days later, she gives a completely different description of the kidnapper and his car. It turns out that the employee confused the man with another customer and gave a completely wrong description. So, in the first few days after Michaela's disappearance, the search was not only for the wrong car. The composite sketches posted throughout Hayward also show a completely wrong man who has nothing to do with the crime. However, Katrina's description of the kidnapper is so precise that the police have no doubt that her description is correct. She may only be 9, but she is also very observant. She can describe the man's clothing and build in great detail. And she remembers a distinctive feature. The perpetrator appears to have had very severe acne on his face. So it's back to square one. New search posters and sketches are printed and distributed everywhere. The media is called in, and Michaela's picture is printed on milk cartons to raise awareness of the case. But as the days, weeks, and years pass, hope fades. It will be a long time before there is a breakthrough in the Michaela Garecht case, and the police will find more than just one suspect. Michaela Garecht case thus becomes a cold case. Hope is rekindled in December 1992. A prison inmate in Indiana named Roger Haggard claims to have buried the body of Michaela in an area called Hunter's Point in San Francisco. When questioned, he changes his statement and claims to have buried Michaela in a gladiolus field in Union City. The police consider this information so credible that they fly Roger Haggard to San Francisco to lead investigators to Michaela's body. Only after Roger and a recovery team have spent more than 8 hours searching a field does Roger admit that he made up the whole story. In reality, he had nothing to do with Michaela Garecht's disappearance. No one knows exactly why Haggard did this. However, his prison sentence is extended by 6.5 years for this brazen lie. The police can rule him out as Michaela Garecht's kidnapper, but who could have been the perpetrator? Over the years, there have been several suspects, and we will now take a closer look at them. Relatively early on, the police begin to take an interest in a man named Tim Bindner. A few months before Michaela disappeared, in June 1988, a girl named Amber Swartz went missing in Pinole, California. Pinole is only about half an hour's drive from Hayward, where Michaela was abducted, and the modus operandi was very similar in both abductions. The girls were basically snatched from the street and dragged into a car in broad daylight. So it seems reasonable to assume that the cases are somehow connected. What's more, the same man, Tim Bindner, is suspected in the Amber Swartz case. Shortly after Amber's disappearance, he was conspicuously involved in the search for the girl. And he does exactly the same thing when Michaela Garecht disappears in November. In the years that follow, Tim Bindner is even suspected in 2 other kidnapping cases. However, nothing concrete can ever be proven against him, neither in the 2 new kidnapping cases nor in the cases of Amber Swartz or Michaela Garecht. If you would like me to make a video about the kidnapping of Amber Swartz, please let me know in the comments. Another name linked to Michaela's disappearance is that of Philip Garrido. In 2009, a girl named J.C. Lee Duggart reappeared after being missing for 18 years. She had been held captive by Philip Garrido all those years. He had kidnapped her in 1991 on the open road with his car. This was only about an hour away from Michaela's hometown of Hayward. When J.C. Lee's story becomes known and Philip Garrido is arrested, it is considered that he could also be responsible for Michaela's abduction. His house and property are thoroughly searched, but unfortunately to no avail. There is no trace of Michaela Garecht. The next suspect comes from a somewhat crazy story. In the 1980s and 1990s, a pair of serial killers wreaked havoc in California. The 2 criminals, Wesley Sherman-Tyne and Lauren Herzog, became known as the Speed Freak Killers. Eventually, the 2 were caught. Wesley is in prison awaiting his final sentence. His accomplice Lauren committed suicide. Shortly afterwards, Wesley informed the police that his accomplice Lauren looked very similar to the composite sketch in the Michaela case. And indeed, Katrina also recognized the resemblance. And she was the only one who actually saw Michaela's kidnappers. The police searched several abandoned wells where Lauren and Wesley, according to the latter, hid the remains of their victims. Thousands of human bones are found, but DNA analysis shows that none of them belong to Michaela Garecht. However, a shoe was found in one of the wells that looks very similar to the one Michaela was wearing when she disappeared. Whether these shoes were forensically examined and whether they really belonged to Michaela was never disclosed. So one can actually assume that this was not the case. Lauren Herzog himself is of course no longer able to comment on the suspicions against him. However, his accomplice Wesley would have had every reason to lead investigators down the wrong track at the time he was still awaiting sentencing. And the death penalty was a real possibility. Perhaps he hoped that he could get a reduced sentence if he could somehow help advance the investigation in another case. It is questionable whether either of the 2 was actually the perpetrator. In the meantime, there has indeed been an arrest. On December 21, 2020, just a few days before Christmas Eve, the Hayward police unexpectedly called a press conference, and for good reason. Investigators announced the arrest of a suspect in the Michaela Garecht kidnapping case. The fingerprint on Michaela's scooter had finally been matched to a man. Convicted serial killer David Misch. He was sentenced to prison in the mid-1980s for the attempted rape of a young woman and theft. On November 14, 1908, he was released on parole. That was exactly 5 days before Michaela was kidnapped. We also know that he returned directly from prison to his hometown of Hayward. In other words, the town where Michaela was kidnapped. 3 days after Michaela's abduction, David Misch was stopped by police while driving his car. At that time, wire cutters, an axe, and a large pocket knife were found in his car. Unfortunately, it is unclear why he was not investigated more closely at the time, despite his history and the strange items in his car. Perhaps this was because Katrina did not provide the correct description of the perpetrator and the car until 2 days after Michaela's abduction. And until then, the search was based on the incorrect description of the kidnapper. It is possible that the investigating officers simply did not realize that David Misch fit the profile of the perpetrator perfectly. If Misch really was Michaela's kidnapper, it would be a fatal twist. It has been proven that David Misch committed at least one more murder after 1988. In 1989, he was arrested for the murder of a woman named Margaret Ball and was later convicted. During his time in prison, DNA evidence also linked him to the double murder of friends Michelle Xavier and Jennifer Dewey. The two teenagers were murdered in 1986. They were last seen in a supermarket before their deaths. Just like Michaela, 3 years later, and in December 2020, he was officially named a suspect in Michaela's kidnapping. The reason for this is not only the fingerprint mentioned above. Investigators have apparently managed to prove that David has an incriminating movement profile. David has a son who died as an infant. His son's first birthday would have been on November 29, 1988. That is exactly the day Michaela was kidnapped. And the cemetery where the child was buried is located directly opposite the crime scene, the Rainbow Market. The police apparently have evidence that David Misch was at the cemetery at around the time of the crime on that day to mourn his son. David was therefore nearby and would have had the opportunity to kidnap Michaela on that day. The trial against David Misch is still pending, and the indictment is currently being prepared. But there is hope that Michaela's family will finally have some certainty after almost 40 years of uncertainty. Michaela's mother Sharon still runs a blog called Seeker's Road. In it, she processes the decades-long search for her daughter and finds the strength she so desperately needs in telling her story. David Misch's defense team has already announced that it intends to plead not guilty. The indictment alleges that Misch is not only guilty of kidnapping Michaela, but also of murdering her. However, since Michaela's body has not yet been found, the case must proceed as a circumstantial evidence trial. And circumstantial evidence trials, as we know, are always difficult. Until the case is heard, feel free to write your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the evidence against David Misch will be enough for a conviction? Or are you more convinced by the arguments against one of the earlier suspects? I look forward to reading your thoughts. A comment is still the best way to support Insolito. Thank you very much. Otherwise, there isn't much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're watching the video, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao everyone.